the song Paul McCartney wrote to mock John Lennon. By the time the Beatles split up in 1970, the band's members had no problem being hostile to one another. After the damage inflicted upon one another during the late Beatles days, it took several years before John and Paul made peace. Paul McCartney and John Lennon were once great collaborators and close friends, but their relationship took a turn for the worst in the lead up to and aftermath of the Beatles breaking up in 1970. Lennon was first to leave the group in 1969, but the public was not aware of the acrimonious split until McCartney announced his departure the following year and addressed the band's separation. In a 1997 biography titled Paul McCartney, Many Years From Now by Barry Miles, McCartney reflected on the contentious relationship he had with Lennon after the band split. Paul McCartney told Miles he continued to reach out to Lennon in the years after the split, but was rebutted. Lennon was not subtle about his feud with McCartney in the early 70s. He frequently dissed him in interviews and wrote songs like How Do You Sleep about his former writing partner. However, McCartney says the resentment was not one-sided. After getting frustrated over Lennon's preaching, McCartney wrote Too Many People encouraging fans not to let Lennon dictate how they are supposed to live their lives. Too Many People was the first song directed at Lennon since the band had broken up. While Dear Friend was a call for a ceasefire, this was more of a direct shot. The song was featured on McCartney's second solo album, Ram, and was a response to Lennon's God, which featured jabs at McCartney and the Beatles. In an interview with BBC, McCartney said Too Many People was his attempt at a diss track. At a time when John was firing missiles at me with his songs, and one or two of them were quite cruel. I don't know what he hoped to gain, other than punching me in the face, he explained. The whole thing really annoyed me. I decided to turn my missiles on him too, but I'm not really that kind of writer, so it was quite veiled. It was the 1970s equivalent of what we might today call a diss track. The idea of too many people preaching practices, it was definitely aimed at John, telling everyone what to do. How Do You Sleep was penned in response to this and featured the conspiracy theory that the real Paul had died and was replaced with the line, "Those freaks was right when they said you was dead." John also claimed Paul only contributed yesterday during his time with the Beatles. Although Lennon was easy to mock in the eyes of his fellow musicians, it never dissuaded him from saying what was on his mind, even when stepping back and returning with an album of heartwarming middle-aged rock songs on Double Fantasy. No matter how many times people have dragged Lennon's name through the mud, no one can claim he was ever afraid to speak his mind. Ultimately, by the time Lennon died, their feud was a thing of the past, a resolution that McCartney is grateful for. I was very glad of how we got along in those last few years, that I had some really good times with him before he was murdered,